G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. It's happened. We've got a new coach. Andrew McQualter has been announced as the new senior coach of the West Coast Eagles, and I must say, not that I really had any idea, but it was probably the most surprising outcome. If you just follow the media trends, and that's all we really have to go off here. I don't know if I ever caught at any time that McQualter was necessarily the favourite. It seemed to be Stephen King for a little bit there. And then, as recently as a couple of days ago, I thought I saw something that suggested Hayden Skipworth was the more likely of the two candidates out of he and McQualter. And King sort of fell by the wayside. I have no idea if it had anything to do with his medical episode as it was reported at the time. I hope not. That would imply that Stephen King's not doing too well. We haven't really heard too much about that. So first of all, my best wishes to him. But the waiting is over and we have a new coach in McQualter. And, I think my approach to this coaching thing was the same as it should be with draft day, although I can't really help myself. You got to avoid picking a favourite and to avoid being disappointed. I wanted to be able to buy in with this new senior coach immediately. And after seeing an interview and listening to him talk and reading about how impressive he was, in his presentation, which ultimately won him the job, I feel pretty happy about it. I think I like him already. And now we embark on what is hopefully a new era for the Eagles, the McQualter era, as opposed to being a chapter. If it's a chapter if he comes in for a few years and, fails. But hopefully this is a long relationship we have with one senior coach, because if you have one senior coach, that kind of implies a degree of success. So first of all, congrats to him as well. There's a very human element to this when you see the video of McQualter and meeting his family and stuff like that. I couldn't help but think, what a cool moment for that family as well. It's really exciting. First of all, huge pay rise, but to get a senior coaching gig anywhere is exciting. So yeah, I felt happy for that family. It's obviously a big move, and hopefully it will be the start of a long and successful relationship with the West Coast Eagles. It's interesting with McQualter. I mean, his football playing resume, certainly not bad, but I think back to some of the recent premiership coaches, and for clarity, McQualter played 94 games. I forgot he played at Gold Coast in 2012. That was well before I started True Footy, but I don't remember that happening at all. I remember him being part of that St Kilda team that essentially got as close to being a premiership winning team as it is possible to get. And they played in a drawn grand final. McQualter was part of that. But 94 games is a fairly modest playing career. And then I started thinking, well, who are the most recent premiership coaches? You go, Chris Scott, did he play in? Oh yeah, he played in 3. Craig McRae, yeah, same team actually. Hardwick, he played in 2. Simo, he played in 2. On the other hand, we are a few days removed from Chris Fagan becoming the first premiership coach to have never played at the highest level. So maybe that doesn't matter. It's all about the person. And I always thought, in terms of favoritism of picking who was going to be the senior coach or who I thought it was going to be, who I wanted it to be, you're limited just to their resume. And then you start to hear the same thing said about a lot of different candidates. The players love him. Good resume. He's coached at several different successful clubs. Tactically, a good innovator. They all become buzzwords that you hear about a lot of the different candidates. And I knew that it was going to come down to the presentation. And ultimately, that's where McQualter reportedly, did a fantastic job. And that was said the same thing about Skipworth, but ultimately they've decided on McQualter, and I will defer to the Eagles' judgment on that. I don't think if the guy is the right guy until you're in a room with him and he's mapping out his vision for the football club. So I'm just going to take it as on face value. He was the best candidate we have. We've proven to do a pretty good job of this in recruiting coaches. We've probably, other than Ken Judge, RIP, that was probably the only coaching gig that, didn't go as planned. I suppose one side note I want to make here is I keep rejecting this notion that's out there that I'm hearing a lot. It's that West Coast aren't appointing the next premiership coach. The vision is here. It's just to get us out of the mire, and then maybe we'll switch it out for a different coach when the time is coming, or that this is a poison chalice. Well, I would just say I don't think West Coast is thinking that way. I think if it was truly, a short-term sugar hit thing to try and get this football club back onto their feet and then we'll reassess, you'd probably be thinking we'd have gone for a more proven, experienced senior coach. Well, for the second time in a row, we've hired a 38-year-old. And I think that's relevant. I see no reason why we would go for a relatively uncapped younger coach if our intention was for it to not be a long relationship. And that was relevant for me. That was probably my biggest reservation with someone like a Hinkley, who that rumor stayed for a little while. It's just that he was significantly older. And my concern is, you want to get a coach that has plenty of years and has the patience to be able to stick in it for the long haul. I see no reason to suggest West Coast is lining up McQualter for a transition period and then they'll move on. I think best case scenario, West Coast is thinking, no, this is the guy that will get us to the premiership. Now, whether they're right is, a whole different kettle of fish, but I don't think that's the mentality of West Coast here. So just a bit on McQualter. Well, 94 games as a player and then spent a long time at Richmond. I think he was there. It's described him as being as a key pillar in Richmond's 3 premierships alongside Damien Hardwick. So, there can't be any doubt that Hardwick is a great coach, probably one of the best of the modern era. You can make an argument about that for sure. So there's a lot of exposure around there. I think Richmond's culture that they instilled there was one of their strongest assets. Tactically, they were a little bit ahead of the competition. It was interesting to see McQualter in the press conference reference the way we're going to play. And he actually referred to both Richmond and, of course, more recently at Melbourne. He spent his last year at Richmond in 2023, and he was interim coach for half of that season, and then he's moved to Melbourne. Melbourne admittedly had a pretty poor year, but as he says, the way they play stacks up, and I don't know, it was just interesting to get insights so early, and maybe we could have just inferred that we were probably going to play a mixture of Richmond's and Melbourne's style, but one thing I'll say is I wouldn't be surprised if he comes in with an idea of how we're going to play, and then that sort of develops over time. I don't think we're going to necessarily be Richmond 2.0 or Melbourne 2.0. It says he's previously assumed a variety of roles during the Tigers dynasty as he took charge of midfield and stoppages. That's a good start. The forward line, and was responsible for ball movement strategy. So that's good. Ball movement's important. It's all really important, to be honest. He spent 4 years as a development coach with Richmond's VFL team between 2013 and 16 and was an assistant coach in 2024. So he's just the 7th coach in our history in 35 years or whatever it is. Got to say, it's one thing interesting for me as I get older. I've talked about, being an Eagles fan as you get older, and, some time ago I started becoming older than a lot of the players on the Eagles playing list. And it's interesting as well, now I look at McQualter and it doesn't feel like he's that much older than me. He is 8 years older than me, but I have a sister who's older than him. So that's kind of a weird new era for me as well. It's not going to be that long. Maybe our next senior coach is going to be younger than me. Just as a little side note there. I also want to pick up on people criticizing the fact that this took too long. I think that's super misguided, because it took me one Google search to realize when the Eagles appointed Adam Simpson as our senior coach, like 11 years ago, and it was technically later than it is now. So in both instances, I'm pretty sure it was the Monday following the grand final. It was for Simpson October 3rd. Today is September 30th. So I think the criticisms about us taking too long are misguided, and I think it was always going to be really important for us to be extremely extensive with this coaching process. Had West Coast announced a coach, 2 weeks into the final series, I'd be thinking, did we really do our best in canvassing everyone and all the best possible candidates for this job? I have no issue at all with it taking a little bit longer. However, I will note that it's probably going to hurt to some extent in terms of getting assistant coaches. But that was also true with Simpson. And Simpson brought over, a lot of his guys. And that will be interesting to see the next step here with McQualter, who comes in, what sort of moves do we make with our existing coaching staff. I'd like to see Jared Schofield stay. I've said before, I wouldn't have minded him being senior coach. What often happens when a new coach comes in is that there's a big transition with the coaching department. And as McQualter says, one guy doesn't lead a team to premiership glory. It's got to be a really strong and cohesive coaching group. And while I hope Schofield's there, I think the decisions that come over the next week or two and how McQualter goes about getting senior assistants to support him will also be very, very key to our hopes. There was a bit of a suggestion. I actually saw this on Backchat. They released a podcast today. And I don't know where else this has come from, but there might have been a suggestion that Stephen King would have brought over guys like Corey Enright and Matthew Scarlett. And I thought, that would have been nice. That would have been nice. I think Enright's at St Kilda. I forget where Scarlett is. He might be at Geelong. I'm not too sure. Stephen King's, of course, at Geelong. But I'll be interested to see if, what happens next in terms of McQualter going about getting some assistant coaches. There's also been plenty of discussion around, the effect this is going to have on our trade period, right? So West Coast, the list management for a start, will always be running independent of the coaching group. So to some extent, I don't know how much it will really interrupt. But however, what I'm really referring to is the idea that Jack Graham and Liam Baker were more likely to come to West Coast if McQualter was senior coach. And I do want to clarify that surely nobody thinks that West Coast made a decision on their senior coach to get 2 players during trade period. I think that would be remarkably short-sighted. Undoubtedly, it is a potential benefit, depending on your view of those players. And now, as we've seen, Liam Baker has requested a trade to the West Coast Eagles. But if anyone thinks that we signed McQualter as senior coach to get these players, well, I would just compare that to marrying a woman because you want her access to her Disney Plus account. The benefit is clear. I mean, you get access to the entire Star Wars saga on there and all the extra shows you get, but geez, it would be remarkably short-sighted, wouldn't it? So just on some trade stuff, there has been a little bit of a suggestion from Toomey that West Coast are tabling their pick 13. I think he's doubled down on that. That's come out twice now. So I guess to speak on that, I'm with people who suggest that Liam Baker would add something to this team. I do. The pick 13 thing makes me balk. I've touched on this a little bit previously, and that may invite some Richmond fans to tell me I'm crazy and he is worth that. That's not really, this is an Eagles fan channel, and I'm more looking at it from what is right for us. Is that the price we're willing to pay? Is it beneficial to us? Rather than arguing over, what is his actual value as a player. And I think if we are, and this has only come from Toomey, we don't know for sure. Bearing in mind, everyone seemed to suggest a couple of days ago that Stephen King and Skipworth were probably more likely to get the senior coaching gig. So there's enough doubt around, Toomey's claim that we're probably offering pick 13. It could be educated opinion on his part, but for me, I'm pretty uncomfortable with offering a pick that early. I know that we're trying to bolster that part of our list, and the draft can be a little bit overrated to some extent in being crucial for a rebuild, but I do think the value of a top 15 pick in this year's draft, which will come from Hawthorn, probably exceeds Liam Baker to us this trade period. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I haven't completely spat the dummy. I'll wait till it's happened before I really unpack that. But if you were someone who was looking at the decision to trade out Tom Barrass for a first round draft pick and probably some change, we'll get something else, I'd imagine. And then you flip that for Liam Baker, the centerpiece of that deal. We've essentially traded Tom Barrass for Liam Baker and a little bit of change. Now, Liam Baker's a good player, but considering the fact that Tom Barrass, we could have kept him. It wasn't that he's necessarily screened to get out the door. We kind of, from what I gather, saw it as an opportunity to improve our draft position by trading out a senior player. Now, to only flip that for another senior player who is good and is 3 years younger, isn't key position, is more of a utility. You can argue the case that we probably need Barrass more. So we'll wait and see on that. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. But as players, Liam Baker and Jack Graham do probably add something. And, from a character point of view, I think that's going to be important. From a list demographic point of view, right in that right age sweet spot, I get that. And, they'd probably improve the team and probably add some protection as midfield rotations for Harley. And, does that in turn make Tim Kelly have a better year than he had in 2024? I think that's possible. So that all remains to be played out. But I suppose in summary, welcome Andrew McQualter. It's time to buy in. I'm fairly comfortable with this decision. As for expectations next year, well, I think we're just looking for improvement and potentially, start to see some green shoots around playing a new style. You'd imagine that's going to happen. I think it's going to take some time for a new coach to get a team playing on his terms. I remember 2014 didn't start that well with Sermo, but by the end of it, you could really see the evolution of a team playing a different style, and sure enough, springboarded that into 2015. I'm not saying that's going to happen. My point is just that there'll be a grace period with McQualter here, and of course our trade period will also probably imply what our expectations are. If we're trading out of the draft too heavily to get established players, then that will impact our expectations for next year. But Eagles fans, let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back pretty soon with some trade updates, I'm sure. Cheers.